because I just love the Peabody. And so I couldn't not do it. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone, parents, alumni, friends of the Peabody Institute who have joined us today. We're aware that many of you have different levels of understanding of what the Peabody does. And so I'm so excited for Ryan to share his presentation with you so people can learn more. And I bet for those of you who think you know a lot, you might even learn a little bit more. First, I'd like to share a little bit about Ryan before he starts off. He became the 8th director of the Peabody Institute of Archaeology in July of 2012. He was first, before that, he had a very long career at Florida State Archaeology. Since joining the Academy, he's done amazing things for us. He has advanced our strategic vision of the Peabody Institute with a focus on collections, education, and repatriation. In 2018, he co-authored Glory, Trouble, and Renaissance at the Robert S. Peabody Museum of Archaeology. That was through the University of Nebraska Press. This book and wonderful volume brings together voices of archaeologists, alumni, faculty, staff, in telling the incredible story of the Peabody. He also co-founded the Journal of Archaeology and Education. This is so classic Andover, and it's amazing that Ryan has done this because it's the only academic journal that is devoted to the intersection of both archaeology and education. Ryan's interdisciplinary human origins course is one of Andover's most popular senior electives. Actually, I think both of my kids took it, and they fondly refer to Ryan as Uncle Ryan. So sorry if I'm embarrassing you, Ryan. And what that course does is explores themes in human evolution and culture. Ryan earned his BA in anthropology from Florida Atlantic University and a master's and a PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida. Thank you for being here, and Ryan, take it away.
Thanks for that nice introduction, Karen. And I will add that for those of you who don't know Karen, she's on the Phillips Academy Board of Trustees, and she's also on our Peabody Advisory Committee. And really love having her as part of that group. And I loved having her children as students in classes. We also went to France with her daughter. You'll see some pictures too from some of those trips. I'm so glad to see all of you. We originally had this as a webinar format where we weren't going to be able to see the attendees. And so I'm glad that we switched over to the meeting format. And I see so many of you that I know and a few that I don't. So, but I'm really happy that you're all here. So I'm gonna share a little bit of information, kind of the 60,000 foot view of the Peabody Institute, and I'm also gonna introduce Absura Ayer, who's a graduate of Phillips Academy, class of 2012, who was very involved with the Peabody when she was a student here, and she's gonna talk a little bit about what she's been doing since her time at Phillips Academy and the Peabody. I'm going to try to share my screen, which hopefully will work. All right, can people see my screen? Move my screen so I can see it. I like to refer to us as Phillips Academy's best kept secret. We meet so many alums, folks that spent a lot of time at Phillips Academy who tell us, especially folks that were here in the 70s and 80s, 90s, and they say, I never went in there. I kind of wondered what was in that building. I walked by it all the time. It's right there on Main Street. It's on the corner. But I don't know what went on in there. And so students today probably will not be saying the same thing in the future. Since over the course of the last 20 years or so, things have changed a lot, and we're really integrated into the Phillips Academy curriculum. So and I'll share some of the ways that we are part of the school now. So here's a quick 5 things that you should know about the Peabody. We were founded in 1901 by Robert S. Peabody. So we're really a 20th century institution. Robert was Phillips Academy class of 1857. I always have to sort of sit with that for a second because I think, you know, really how long ago that was. So he graduated before the Civil War. And later in his life, at the end of the 19th century, he got really excited about archaeology, collecting, and he amassed a very large collection, which formed the nucleus for the collection that's here at Phillips Academy. He had about 40,000 Native American objects in his house in Philadelphia, and his wife was probably not super happy with him. But he ultimately established this institution. It was initially called the Department of Archaeology. And he really had sort of an amazing vision for what this institution should be. He wanted it to be one of the academic departments at his high school alma mater. And even to this day, archaeology really doesn't show up very much in the high school curriculum. So as Karen said, we founded the Journal of Archaeology and Education, really as a way to sort of help address that a little bit. Throughout the 20th century, the people that worked here were really some of the leaders in American archaeology. People like Alfred Kidder, Scotty McNeish were personnel here. Scotty was the director here from the late 60s to the early 1980s, and was really one of the giants of American archaeology during that time. We have a very large collection, over 500,000, primarily Native American objects. That's a big collection for a relatively small institution. We only have 5 or 6 employees at any given time. We usually have a couple of temporary staff right now who are working on cataloging this massive collection, and we're somewhere in the 90% completion zone. So that's really exciting for us. This has been one of the big challenges, is dealing with this collection. So along with 500,000 objects, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 plus photographs, everything from glass plate negatives to 35mm slides, and 300 to 400 linear feet of archives. And I always like to, people are always comparing us to the Addison Gallery of American Art, which is our sister institution across the street, also part of Phillips Academy. And I think they have about 22,000 objects in their collection. So by way of comparison, we have a lot more to manage. And we like to tease each other too, but so it's a friendly competition. As I mentioned, we've become really integrated into the Phillips Academy curriculum. So in most normal years, certainly not in COVID year, but we usually have between 11 and 1,500 students that come for classes and programming here, Phillips Academy students. We also do programming beyond the campus here that reaches another 3,000 or 4,000 individuals. But we have become really integrated into classes, really everything from art to astronomy. So we figured out ways to put archaeology in the high school curriculum. And the last thing, though certainly not the least thing, is a focus on repatriation and work with Native American tribes. This is probably our 2 main foci are education and work with descendant communities, with tribes. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of that kind of work in a moment. We've been working with our advisory committee on some new strategic planning. On our new mission is this expression, to educate for a world of human difference, which we have borrowed from the famous anthropologist Ruth Benedict. There's a bit of a question of whether or not she actually said this or not, but we like it anyway. And she did say something like this in one of her books. And as I mentioned, our focus is on archaeology and education. So here you can see students along with me and one of the Chinese language faculty on a trip to China, and also students in one of my classes where we had an opportunity to do some skeletal anatomy. So I'll kind of briefly hit some of the ways that students on campus can be connected with the Peabody. One of those is through work duty. So students here at the Academy typically are involved from 10th through 12th grade in doing some kind of service on campus. In some cases, that's delivering messages or cleaning up things. And so one of the other ways is to work with us behind the scenes here at the Peabody, really mostly on collections issues. So students have been involved in doing photography, cataloging. You can see a student here is making a foam and fabric ring mount to help support some ceramic vessels. And typically, unfortunately not in COVID times, but typically we have about 20 to 25 students that are doing work duty with us. And I think it's been, we've heard from students is that the time with us is really meaningful. I know that I find some of this collections work, cataloging or photographing objects really relaxing. Some people find it tedious, but there are a few of us who find this to be really kind of it takes sort of an intense focus, and you have to have good hand skills. So our curator tests people and figures out who's clumsy and who's not, and assigns tasks based on that. Who has good handwriting too can be important. But it's, I think what we've heard from students, recent students, but also students from the 70s, that this place was a little bit of a haven for them from the sort of more intense thing that's going on at the rest of the Academy. So we kind of love that. We've also been described as being kind of quirky. And so we tend to attract, I think, people that appeals to, which is, I think, kind of a neat niche to have. As I mentioned before, one of the ways that we also describe ourselves is the on-campus field trip destination. So those of you who have been students at Phillips Academy or parents or familiar with the school know that the people's day here is really packed. And despite the fact that we're close to places like Salem, Massachusetts, and the Peabody Essex Museum, or other institutions that are down in Boston, it's really hard to take a class on a field trip. And so to have an institution like this, we've become a field trip. So faculty have told us that it's really great for them to be able to get out of their classroom spaces and do something different. And we will work with faculty to create lessons that fit into their classes. We also have a bunch of canned lessons, so that are pre-prepared that we can deliver to students. And Lindsay, who you'll see, she's got the gray sweater on here, and myself, we do most of these lessons. And as I said, we have literally thousands of students that typically come every year. Here you've got students that are from an art class looking at some of these Mexican masks. But we've pretty much figured out every angle. So we've been able to put archaeology into everything from art classes to math classes. We've been involved in doing student travel for a really long time, at least since the late 1990s, and actually even before that. Scotty took students to Mexico, scouting McNeish in the 70s. And here you can see students that are on Donnie Slater's, one of his trips to Mexico. This trip is actually associated with a class that Donnie teaches that's based here called Maya Cosmos. And so students participate in the class and then they have an opportunity to go on the trip. And with the creation of the Learning in the World program on campus, we've been able to roll a lot of our trips into that program. So we have trips that go to Mexico and Peru. I've been involved in travel to France, and I saw Meg Conkey on here, and she's been really generous and has invited us to visit her project in France. It's really exciting. And most recently, I've developed a trip to China that we were able to run in spring of 2019. And we would have run it this year. Of course, we couldn't. So hopefully we'll be able to get back to that. I think I've got a picture of us in China. There's some of our students hiking on the Great Wall. And like our trip to France and Donnie's trips to Peru and Mexico, these trips are largely based in archaeology and anthropology, and I think also give students some grounding in how do you, how can you be a good citizen of the world? How can you be, a visitor to somebody else's country and culture? With a little bit of an anthropological lens, I guess. We also do offer a number of courses that are based here out of the Peabody, principally senior elective courses. So Marcel Doheny, who some of you know, had been teaching a great class called Race and Identity in Indian Country that explored the history of archaeology and museums and Native Americans. Donnie Slater teaches his Maya Cosmos course out of the Peabody, and Jerry Hagler in biology taught for many years Human Origins course, which I took over about 5 or 6 years ago. And so this was our last in-person session of Human Origins in the fall of 2019. What you can see the students all holding up here are 3D models that they printed, 3D prints of fossil human skulls. So they picked a particular fossil skull and then had an opportunity to generate a 3D print and had to do some presentations. So that's actually not the Peabody, that's the renovated library on campus and the makerspace. But we didn't let COVID stop us, and actually taught this class again in the fall online. It was tough because traditionally this had been a real hands-on class where we had students learn how to do some flint knapping, make stone tools. We typically had people try to make fire, which happily people weren't really very good at. We also do things like throwing spears with the atlatl, a variety of hands-on activities. And so it was tough to rebuild this class and maintain some of that. But I did come up with the idea of having kits that we sent home with everybody. And we had students that were all over the place. So we had some students that were here on campus. We had some students in the area. We had some students who were in other states and cities. And so we sent these flint knapping kits home with everybody, and people spent a good week or so making stone tools. And so I actually got some really great results, probably better than the times that we spent just doing it for 75 minutes in class. One of the other collaborations that we've had that's been really exciting and has been going on for about 6 or 7 years now is with Thayer Zader, who teaches ceramics in the art program here on campus. Some of you probably know Thayer. And we partnered with friends of ours in New Mexico, Pueblo potters from the Pueblo of Jemez. Here you can see Dominique Toya, and her sister Mia was in one of my earlier slides. But they're a family of potters. Dominique and her mom, Maxine, this is how they make their living, is making native pottery, native art, and exhibiting them at juried shows, selling them. And so they've been coming for about 6 or 7 years now, usually in the spring, and doing a workshop with students in ceramics classes. And it's a pretty unusual thing, I think. We can't find a lot of other examples of this, to really be able to spend an entire week working with native potters. They actually send clay from New Mexico, so the students can work with that clay, and then they come, they help them finish their pieces, decorate them, and then the culmination of the week is an open air pottery firing. And we don't tell the fire department or anybody about that until about 5 minutes before we start. And then we're like, just in case you see smoke or get any calls, that's just us. The buildings aren't on fire. We've just, created a large conflagration out behind the building. So, and as I mentioned, oh, pardon me. As I mentioned when I began talking, the two things that we're really focused on are education, archaeology, especially in the high school classroom, but also repatriation and work with tribes. And so in 1990, the federal government passed the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which required institutions like ours to assess their collections and then contact tribes to repatriate ancestors, funerary belongings, a few other categories of objects like sacred objects. And so I think to Phillips Academy and our institute, the Peabody's great credit, the people that worked here in the 1990s, Jim Bradley and Leah Rosenmeyer, really took NAGPRA to heart. I think they decided that this was something that was worth doing. It was important work. It was healing work, and really threw themselves into it and did quite a bit. 30 years on, we're still working on it, but we've done it in a way where we've been very open to the conversations and the return of these kinds of objects. And it's really benefited us. It's really put us in some amazing conversations with tribes. And we're at the point now where we're really kind of moving beyond the basics of just returning the types of objects that are covered in the law, and working with tribes on co-curation and thinking through how do we turn over some of the decision-making around collections to the tribes, who are really the rightful communities, that should make decisions about exhibits or about research. And so we're starting that actually in kind of a pilot study with our partners at Minnesota White Earth Band of Chippewa Indians in northern Minnesota. And so that's really exciting. It's the kind of thing we talk to people from other museums, and we ask them, well, what kind of policies do you have around allowing descendant communities to make some decisions, to be involved in the decision making around their material culture heritage. And typically people have policies around NAGPRA, certain categories of objects, but what we've recognized is that the tribes don't have those same categories. They don't see things as NAGPRA and not NAGPRA. They see all of these objects as things that were made and used by their ancestors. And so we've tried to figure out ways that our policies can actually match better with that way of thinking. And it's been a very interesting part of this journey. We also recognize, as the school has really increased its focus on anti-racist work, that all of this work with tribal communities has been anti-racist in a way to address the colonial past here. Let's see. I, of course, want to plug and our part of the current Knowledge and Goodness campaign. So our big focus is on renovation of our collections spaces. So right now you can see this is what our collection spaces look like when we have the fire department personnel come through and kind of review the building every year. They always tell us this is this is not great. All of the wooden cabinets and shelves are kind of a fire hazard. So our hope is to try to move to a place where we have metal shelving and climate control over at least the collection spaces in the building. So right now we don't have any HVAC systems or really way to control climate, and the humidity is the challenge. So it can big swings in the humidity can create a lot of damage to things that you wouldn't even think of. You'd think of stone tools as being sort of inert, but actually they can become dehydrated and start to become brittle because they've gotten too dry. So that's been our big focus. So we're working through that, and hopefully we will be able to achieve some of those kinds of things. So let's see, I'm going to stop sharing now. Let's see. Do you want me to introduce Absura, or do we want to take some questions? Maybe I'll go ahead and introduce Absura. What do you think, Beth?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. So Absura Ayer's Phillips Academy class of 2012. After she graduated, she went to Yale. She has had a fascinating job with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office working on the trafficking of cultural objects, and now has started law school at Harvard. So this is an extremely accomplished member of the Andover community, and I'm also really happy that she's joined our advisory committee. So we're benefiting from her passion and knowledge. And she was one of the people who was really involved with the Peabody when she was here. So I'm gonna turn it over to Absura and ask her to share a little bit about her experiences here. And I'm sure she'll maybe tell us about some of her work in New York too.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you to you all for being here and for giving me the chance to share a little bit about the perspective that I had being a student at Andover and really getting the opportunity to work with the Peabody. So my Peabody story actually begins my junior year because when I came to campus, I was assigned to Doublebrook, so right next door to the Peabody. And I remember seeing this big building every day as we would walk, over across campus. And it was really one of those times that I just sort of went over, knocked on the door, and I forget who answered, but they sort of explained to me the various ways that students could get involved, including as a work duty student. So to echo what Ryan said, the Peabody was really a haven for myself and the other students who wanted to work on collections, who could kind of step away from the stress that you had maybe over at the Owl Library and then go into this space where you're handling artifacts that are hundreds of years old, or, you know, getting a chance to learn about a piece of work that's been part of the collection for decades. And it was really thanks to this experience and the staff at the Peabody, in particular, Marlette Taylor and all the other folks there, that I started to kind of find other ways in which students like myself who were interested in the archaeology and history of Andover could come together. So a group of us started the Andover Archaeology and History Club, which not only worked with the Peabody, but also went up into the archives, where we actually have like Secretary Stimson's steamer trunk and all these other sort of memorabilia that are very Andover specific. And additionally, I think the Peabody really helped form some of the interests that I've continued to try to pursue since leaving Andover. So my senior year, a group of us got an Abbott grant to host a series of speakers to come to campus to talk to students about cultural resource management and sort of how different individual stakeholders may be thinking about archaeology, thinking about artifacts, and managing that. And that sort of work really flowed straight into the projects that I was involved with at Yale. So I began to do a lot of research on the market for looted art and artifacts. So I spent a lot of time traveling to Turkey and Colombia, Syria, Peru, and learning about communities which had lost their heritage to trafficking. And it was around this period of time that the whole world sort of started to pay attention when ISIL was destroying artifacts in Syria. I mean, everyone sort of can remember the stunning ruins of Palmyra that were really dramatically destroyed. And so at that time, I kind of had a bigger sense that this is what I wanted to do. And I found this unit in New York at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office that focuses specifically on the trafficking of art and antiquities. And so I moved to New York in 2018, and since had been involved with a series of investigations. There was, you know, a gold coffin that was looted from Egypt during the revolution that ended up at the Met, to like a fragment from Persepolis that had been stolen during the 1930s and had come to New York for an art fair, and was on display on Park Avenue. So it's kind of that experience that all led me to law school. I've actually continued working with the team part-time, and it's something that I think I'm very passionate about, and I credit you really Andover to allowing me to discover this interest and realize, you know, my interest in continuing to work with it. And I think it's only been amazing to stay connected with the Peabody through the Peabody Advisory Committee. I'm always excited to see students who are still at Andover. We had someone who came a few sessions ago to do a land ceremony. And so it's a really great way to, from my perspective, see how the Peabody continues to connect with students day in and day out, and to be able to hopefully stay connected to a place that's meant so much to me over my time at Andover.
Oh, thank you, Absura. It's great to have you as part of the Peabody Advisory Committee. I think this is I think we're doing great on time, and we definitely want to have some questions from folks that have joined us. So
absolutely. So there are some in the chat, and I'm happy to moderate this Q&A with Ryan, and certainly if you have questions for Absura as well. Ryan, one of them that came in said, I know of several other Peabody museums throughout New England. Could you please describe the connection to those, if there is one?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. So the other three Peabodys are the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, which has really become a really significant art museum. The Harvard Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard in Cambridge, and the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History in New Haven. The other three institutions were founded by George Peabody, who was from near here, Danvers, Mass. He was, his biographies describe him as a self-made man. He spent a lot of his adult life in England. His partners were people like J.P. Morgan. Chase Bank could easily be called Peabody Bank. So he was instrumental in the founding of what became Chase. And he was basically an incredibly wealthy individual who got interested in philanthropy. So he's one of the early big philanthropists. His friends in Boston asked if he would endow some sort of cultural institution in that city, and that's where Harvard Peabody Museum, the Harvard Peabody Museum came from in 1866. He'd also paid for a number of his nephews to go to school at Phillips Academy. So Robert Peabody was one of his nephews, as was Othniel Marsh, who some of you may know as the famous Yale paleontologist. And so when Othniel Marsh found out about the Harvard Peabody, he said, hey, Uncle George, what about Yale? Like we could, why don't we have a Peabody Museum? And so George was like, you got it. So that's where those two institutions came from. The museum in Salem is kind of a conglomeration of a number of institutions that merged, but also one that was founded by George that was a very significant natural history museum there. And so we're kind of the smallest of the four Peabodys. We're kind of like the nephew of them, I guess. Yeah, so that's the family genealogy. And Robert was an attorney and was the executor of George's estate after he passed on, and used some of the residue of that estate to found this institution.
Great, thank you. Next, Mr. Ryan, can you explain the reasons for the switch to being an institute as opposed to the Peabody Museum?
Well, there were a couple of reasons behind that. One was that we did keep getting confused with the other Peabodys, and we still do. So I'm not sure that that's really been resolved. But we also, there was a decision made around 2002 or shortly after to really move away from doing exhibitions. So throughout a lot of our history, we did do a lot of exhibitions. Certainly the folks in the 20th century did them in the 1990s when Jim Bradley was the director. They had a really ambitious program of exhibitions, but our spaces are really small, and the market, the museum market here is very competitive in this part of the Northeast. And so I think wisely, we moved away from doing exhibitions. And so our focus has mainly been on programming, on classes for the Phillips Academy community. So we aren't really a publicly facing museum in that sense. And so that was part of the rationale for becoming an institute rather than a museum. And actually the museum name had been fairly recent. So initially we were the Department of Archaeology, and then in the late 30s, we became the Peabody Foundation for Archaeology. But that was confusing because people thought we were a foundation that was giving out money, and we certainly weren't doing that. So then in the 90s, we became a museum. And so then we switched to institute several years ago, more recently.
Thank you. Any suggestions on ninth graders becoming involved at the Peabody? My son, who requested that I sit in on this session, is very interested in learning more.
Well, hopefully, as we get back to I hate to use the word normal, but as we get to sort of a post-COVID world, we hope to have work duty students again. We've really missed having students in the building. Certainly, we anticipate ramping up our involvement with classes again. And then, there are the travel programs, which I hope we get back to again soon as well. And it's interesting, when I designed the China travel program, I actually made it so that it was open to all age groups. And I didn't know how many ninth graders I was going to get because, that's a big thing. And I actually had a ton of ninth graders who went to China with us. And I was really impressed by how intrepid these, these students were in signing up for that trip, because they were brand new to the school. They didn't really know me or the other faculty that were involved in the trip, and so I like that we did that with that trip. I think we did some things with that trip that made it really appealing to a really diverse audience. Sometimes the trips are very focused on older students and actually exclude younger students. And so I tried to make one that would be appealing and exciting to everybody. So I think there's lots of ways, and hopefully, over the course of the next year, we'll see some of those starting to come back online.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we have time for one more. Someone is asking, do you have a catalog of artifacts online? I read an article about artifacts from the Tyndall Air Force from 1908 that I'd love to learn more about.
Oh, interesting. So we do have an online collections page that does have a lot of objects in it. It doesn't have all 500,000 or so. There's several thousand, kind of a representative sampling. There are also some of our photo collections are in there. We probably do have some objects from Tyndall Air Force Base, which is in Florida, in the Florida Panhandle. We received a gift when we opened in 1901 from an I don't know if I want to use the word archaeologist, but an antiquarian, let's say, named Clarence Bloomfield Moore, who was from Philadelphia, who his hobby was excavating sites. And during the winter months, he would take a steamboat with a crew, and he would go up and down all of the major rivers in the southeastern United States and secure permissions to excavate sites. He did that in Florida, Alabama, Georgia, pretty much anywhere there were rivers and it was warmer. And then he would take the collections back to Philadelphia. And his Florida Panhandle collections produced a tremendous amount of pottery, kind of a surplus. And so he started distributing those collections to other institutions. Many of his collections were originally at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, for those of you who are familiar with sort of Philadelphia cultural institutions. Most of his collections now are at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. You can actually see some of his collections on exhibit if you go there. And we have a bunch as well, as do a number of other institutions, Davenport Museum of Natural Sciences in Iowa, a number of other places. Even the Springfield Museum in Springfield, Mass. has some C.B. Moore collections. So I don't know if any of those collections are online. They could be, but you can be in touch with me and I can share more information since I'm originally a Florida person.
Thanks, Ryan. I will put, I'm going to put Ryan's and my email addresses in the chat for additional questions. Some great ones have come in. And I just, there was a message shared in the chat that I asked permission to share from Chris Sokolexis, who was with the Penobscot Nation. And I just thought it might be a nice note to end on. Chris shared, on behalf of the Penobscot Nation in Maine, we are honored and respect our relationship with the R.S. Peabody and the friendships we've made over the years. So Chris, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh,
thank you, Chris. We really value the work that we've done and partnerships with all of the Wabanaki tribes, and we're actually working on some additional repatriation with the Wabanaki in Maine. So that's exciting. But thank you, Chris. And as Beth said, you know, I love to hear from people and talk about these things. And so please do feel free to write to me. And I'm happy to, chat some more. Certainly happy to talk on the phone, or we can set up a Zoom call. And at some point, hopefully look forward to having folks visit us here again and do tours and things like that. So.
Thank you all. We look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Beth.